From South Carolina is the South Carolina Congressman, the Democrat James Clyburn. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us, and I want to get your quick reaction to the sheriff's decision today to fire that deputy.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Wolf. I want to thank Sheriff Lott for doing what he did as promptly as he did. I know the sheriff very well. I think he did what was proper. Unfortunately, this should not end thus. I think that we have to begin to review our school procedures. Now, Wolf, as you probably know, I'm a former public school teacher. I started my professional career teaching. In fact, I started teaching 8th graders. And I know what it is to have an 8th grader act up in class. That's not criminal behavior. We all have had young children, well, not all of us, but I've had teenagers, and sometimes teenagers mouth off. And when they do, we have to treat them as teenagers, and we have to conduct ourselves as professionals. That deputy, that resource officer did not conduct himself as a professional dealing with a young developing child. And we should always keep in mind that all of us have been young ourselves, and all of us know that we have sometimes act out our age, but adults must always act their age as well. And this resource officer did not act his age, did not follow procedure. And let me tell you something else. We got to change these laws in South Carolina. I've been talking about these aggressive laws that we've been putting on the books in recent years. The fact of the matter is we've had 1,200, the third biggest level of arrest in South Carolina now, or school disorders. That is crazy stuff. We've got these young people developing criminal records for the rest of their lives. Then we tell them you can't vote once you get the criminal record. And we're doing that to young high school and junior high school children. That is an abomination that we need to look at in South Carolina and stop some of this foolishness.
Well, do you think it's time to change the law in South Carolina and get those sheriff's deputies out of these schools?
Absolutely. They can be in the schools to protect the students, but they've got no business in a classroom meting out discipline. Discipline in that classroom belongs to the teacher. The teacher should go to the administrator. The administrator should never bring any kind of a deputy sheriff in the classroom unless there's some kind of bodily harm being threatened. If somebody is using a cell phone and should not be, that should not lead to a criminal arrest and certainly should not lead to personal injury. A 13-year-old girl, I'm sorry, not 13 years old, but 16. A 16-year-old young girl being treated that way by a 300-pound weightlifter. This guy looked like he was practicing his weightlifting on that little girl. This is crazy stuff, and we all know it. And we in South Carolina ought to be ashamed of it, and we ought to respond the way we should respond, and that is to take a look at these draconian laws that we put on the books and take a look at the procedure involving resource officers in the classrooms. They ought to be there to protect outsiders from coming in harming kids who are sitting in the classroom, never to meet our discipline to an unruly child, because most children I know at one time or another are in fact unruly.
As you know, the State, that's the newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina, they're out with an editorial describing how this young girl's arrest is challenging the entire state, just as the state was challenged by other incidents, including that Charleston, South Carolina church massacre back in June, the police shooting of an unarmed black man in April. Let me read to you from the editorial. It is essential that we again show amazing peace, calm, and togetherness. We inspired ourselves and the nation before. We must do it again. What's your recommendation to the folks there in South Carolina? What's the most important thing, Congressman, you need to do?
Well, let me remind you, well, back in the 60s, in fact, I was arrested on that day back in 1961 when we challenged the breach of the peace laws in South Carolina. They passed laws back in the 60s that keep us from exercising our rights to peaceably assemble. We know these are reactions to certain things. Certainly there are times when we have problems in the classrooms. There are times when we have problems on the school grounds. But let's take a look at these laws and see whether or not they are laws being put in place to protect or put in place to mete out some kind of a punishment which could ruin children for the rest of their lives. What happens to the young lady who took the video? She too was arrested and handcuffed. That is crazy stuff that ought not be happening to young people, to children on the school ground. I have a daughter that teaches at one of the feeder schools for Spring Valley. She's over at Dent Middle School. We talk all the time about what the challenges are for middle school students. Certainly they're going to act out. But we as adults must act like adults irrespective of how children may act.
Good point. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.